Welcome to episode 6 of the Formula E Zone podcast. A pretty unique episode today, considering all three of us were actually in Rome for the Rome Prix. So that's why it's a little bit late out, but don't worry, we've got plenty to talk about from a really unique perspective this time. So hopefully, fingers crossed, everything goes well. As always, links are in the description for Patreon, links to Twitter, all that good stuff. So before we start anything, let's meet the guests. And it's a very familiar lineup, and I'm sure you're all used to it by now. First of all, Jack. Welcome back, Jack.
Hello everybody. Yeah, it's great to be back. Thanks so much.
It was a great weekend, mate. And I just want to say again, thank you for taking me with Formula E Zone. It was an absolute blast. But unfortunately, there was one stain on the weekend, and that was I had to meet Tobias. Welcome back, Tobias.
Thanks for having me.
To be fair, it's normally me that's getting the hate from Dan, so it's a nice change of pace.
Wow. Yeah. I thought I better mix it
up a bit. Yeah.
You took me to the race, Jack, so I've got to change it a little bit, haven't I? But yes, obviously today we're going to be talking about the Rome Prix. And before we get into any of the juicy details, before we get into qualifying, two new drivers returning to the grid this weekend. We had Maxi Gunther and Alex Lynn. We didn't really discuss this in the pre-sort of chat, but Alex Lynn, PK out. Were you too surprised at this sort of mid-season change? I'll start with you, Jack.
I was surprised a little bit, actually. But to be fair, thinking about it, probably not, because PK is a driver that if he's not winning, he's going to get upset fairly quickly, because it's either win or, he's like win or go home. And I think he had enough. And he might be regretting it, actually. Funny enough, I'm not going to spoil it. Well, I know we kind of all know, but we'll talk about it later in the podcast. But considering the result, we might be a bit regretting it. But was it a one-off for Jaguar? But yeah, I can sort of see maybe why PK left. He was sort of being outperformed by Evans as well.
Yeah, and he's been outperformed by Evans for months and years already.
Yeah.
Ever since he joined Jaguar, he's just not been the same. I'm surprised by the timing of the change. I'm not surprised by PK leaving Jaguar, but I was expecting to have the change take place after the season ended. That said, Lynn has been around ever since the Mexico round. I mean, ever since 2016 Donington preseason testing. He did a Jaguar test back then as well, when he was fighting against I think it was Mitch Evans.
Yeah, there was
for the second seat alongside Adam Carroll. Yeah. And he was supposed to drive in the Mexico test, and sadly couldn't because he had Aston Martin commitments. Obviously, where he's racing in WEC with them, and that was the big hindrance there. And now he's back at Jaguar as a full-time driver. And as I said, I'm not surprised by the move. I'm only surprised by the timing of the move, because that just is a big upset to the team. Halfway point of the year, you usually don't want to change your lineup at this stage.
Yeah, I felt Lynn was a good replacement. He's sort of done. He's done Rome, he's done Paris. No one's done Bern, okay, because it's a new track, and then he's done New York. So at least he's a driver that knows the circuits, has already been there.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually a good point. Yeah, he's done all the circuits. He has done New York twice. Yep. The first time out, he was on pole that he did New York. So he certainly does know how to drive a race car, and he's been linked to Jaguar for 3 years, as I said. So yeah, it's a fair decision by Jaguar to replace PK with Lynn. I'm a little surprised by the timing, as I said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you there. And like you say, the timing may be a little bit strange, but that really didn't affect Jaguar like I expected to. Getting into Superpole straight away, Mitch Evans. A real surprise, that one. I know I was speaking to you, Jack, at the beginning of the weekend, and you asked me who I thought was going to be on Superpole, and I, as a joke, said Mitch Evans. I thought, looking at Jag's pace, across the majority of this season, it wasn't looking too great, but then to see him show that turn of pace in qualifying was bizarre. And actually, I think this is... I'll let you two talk about this in a minute if you want, but this is just how qualifying is, isn't it? If you're in that Group 2, Group 3, yeah, you're going to be favoured for that super pole, and changing conditions as well was a nice added touch, a nice bit of spice into qualifying, which I quite enjoyed as well. But we also saw the 2 Dragon cars in the Super Pole. That was very strange to see. They haven't been on the podium this season. Vandoorne in that HWA car that had been struggling so much. Lotterer, he looked super quick all weekend. He was probably, him and Buemi, the 2 that you maybe would perhaps expect to be in that Super Pole. But I'll start with you, Tobias. Was there anything really that jumped out at you at qualifying?
Oh, Dragon, obviously. I mean, the thing about qualifying this time out was that the disadvantage of Group 1 was catalyzed by rain ahead of the group qualifying. So we had, it was raining cats and dogs during the IPSE Trophy race. And that meant that the circuit was wet at the start of qualifying, and that just turned the tables, and Group 1 had an even bigger disadvantage compared to Group 4. And that meant that obviously HWA and both Dragons advanced to Super Pole. I think it's the first time we've actually seen proper pace coming out of the Dragon powertrain. The Penske EV3, I think it is, it's been nowhere this season. We've not seen any bit of performance coming out of the Dragon apart from this qualifying, and that's the thing that really stood out to me. I was sitting near the Audi guys in the media center when I was there, and was telling him, what year is it? I mean, come on, are we back in 2016 again? That's the last time when we've seen actual pace coming out of the Dragon garage. So, big surprise to see Dragon up that far. Both, especially because it's both cars.
Yeah, it was interesting with Dragon because we hadn't seen it. We hadn't seen it in ages, as you said. And for them to be there and actually challenging, it was good because you had to think about Dragon, and it's an independent team compared to all the manufacturers that we have. Well, I think it technically counts as a manufacturer team, essentially, with the Penske powertrain. But then, obviously, they're not building road cars. They're there to they build their own in-house powertrain, and they go racing. But if you're at the back and you're an independent team, and you're not looking like you're showing any signs of progression, you're like, when is the plug going to be pulled on that team? I felt, that was probably the first team I was looking to be taken over by a new manufacturer probably coming in, because if they're not performing the way that they do, that they have been, then it could have been. But at least there was a sign of hope for them in Rome in qualifying, that there is some pace somewhere in that powertrain. So hopefully for the rest of the season they can sort of extract that and actually move forward and start scoring some points.
That's true.
Yeah.
Dan, who were you surprised by?
Okay. The Dragon cars. Yeah, for sure. They were. I was surprised at Lotterer as well, actually. Not in the sense that I expect Lotterer to be thereabouts with Super Bowl, but how far and how comfortably he was ahead of Jev all weekend. And I know the qualifying system favoured Lotterer over Jev, but he just seemed to really be able to nail this circuit, and was probably, like I say, the biggest name up there in Super Bowl. So I was impressed with him, but I think everyone that made it into Super Bowl, it was just like I say, the changing conditions was a really nice added touch, and there's always bizarre results in qualifying, but yeah, for me, Lotterer, I was impressed with that.
To be fair though, Super Bowl was pretty boring.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, well, the rain affected it massively. It was raining really heavily when Buemi went out, and then it stopped raining. So of course, Lotterer made a mistake on his pole position lap.
Yeah.
And the Jaguar guys thought he had it, but the track had dried out so much between Evans' lap and Lotterer's lap that he was still on pole. So
that's true.
I knew after Gunther and had gone out on his Super Pole lap what was going to happen. I knew Lotterer would be on pole. I was already writing it, because the track was drying out, and obviously the longer it dries out, the quicker the track's going to be. So the last man across the line, pardon the pun in a sense, with everything we know about wet weather in motorsport, but the last man across the line will be on pole, and that person was Lotterer.
So does this mean now, this might be wrong, I don't think it is, are Neo the only team that haven't got in Super Pole now?
I would say so, yeah.
Yes.
Maybe
Yeah.
HW,
No,
I'm not sure.
Vandoorne was in Super Pole.
Venturi, sorry.
Yeah.
HW certainly was in Super Pole. How about Venturi. I'm not sure about them.
Yeah, I think Massa's got into it. Anyway, that doesn't matter too much. That was just me.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Mortara's been in Super Bowl.
Mortara's been in Super Bowl. Okay, good.
Yeah, but no, Dragon, that was a mega job from them. Their fortunes changed in lap 1, I think we could say. That changed very, very quickly. Lap 1 was one of the more crazier lap 1s we have seen this season. Early doors, pretty straightforward. It seems like there was guys on the dry side of the grid really had good starts, but apart from that, we saw Lopez running wide, and the first corner, I think the nature of the corner, it was fairly clean for Formula E standards. The rest of the lap wasn't clean by any means. We saw Sims in the wall. We saw Gunther doing some Fast and Furious Tokyo drifting going on, hit the wall, and his bodywork flying all over the circuit going down the hill. And then we saw a bit of an incident between Lopez again, this time with Sam Bird getting a bit messy. Jack, you've got links with the Virgin team. How were you seeing this incident?
Sam, I knew it was going to be a crash, sadly. So they're coming down to that chicane just before the start line. Where the start was, and Sam did the switchback going in and was going around the outside and was clearly ahead. He was definitely like half a car ahead of Lopez, but with the nature of that corner being you really have to swing it in. Like, it's not an easy chicane like you can get a move down the outside and sneak in on the inside, because you really have to turn the car in order to get the move done, which Bird obviously tried to do, but Lopez was there, and Lopez, I don't know, you didn't see many shots of it, but either understeered, and if any slight of understeer or oversteer into Bird, and that's it, he's hitting the wall. And that's, as soon as I saw, I thought it was a risk from Sam to go around the outside and put his car in that position so early in the race. So I was expecting the contact, and which happened, which then for Bird, and we'll talk about that in a second. But what we were discussing before is there was probably an opportunity, but they put a wall there and then they put another wall behind it. So what we were thinking is that could have been a perfect opportunity for maybe some, I don't know, sausage curbs, and cause it like a small little runoff. Because if it was a runoff section, then Bird could have either taken to the runoff and just had to give the place back. You probably would have dropped down quite a few places down the order in that space, but it would have stopped him from breaking his rear end, which then needed to be replaced in the red flag incident that comes up in a minute. So I think there was a chance there to have some runoff, and I think maybe Formula E, in terms of its track design, if there is an area where you can have a little bit of a runoff area rather than just sticking a wall there, but then have some sort of, which they've done before. Like, we've seen it in Beijing, we've seen it in Putrajaya, we've seen it in other tracks where there's some chicanes you can just go straight through, but there's like some sausage curbs that you have to like go over, but then you just have to get the position back. I felt like maybe for Rome they could have had one there.
Yeah, that's true. Talking about circuit design actually is a good point. I've seen many people criticize Formula E circuit design over the last couple of months. People always say it's a bit of a dilemma for Formula E, really, because on one hand, circuits seem to be too narrow, and people always complain about narrow circuits, rarely any overtaken opportunities, but it's mainly just that the walls are just too close to each other. On the other side, that's street circuits in a nutshell. Closed walls, narrow circuits. And street circuits are a core part of Formula E's DNA. So on one hand we have FE needs walls and narrow street circuits as part of its DNA, otherwise Formula E wouldn't be Formula E. On the other side, circuits are too narrow and provide too little overtaking opportunities. What's your take on that?
Well, Dan, I'm sorry to jump in, but
that's okay.
In terms of, let's just move on to the red flag incident that just came on like a second ago. But so Lopez goes in, crashes, sort of loses. I don't know. He might have got some damage. I was just even thinking that there could have been some sort of damage to his car because it was a hefty contact with Bird. Okay, yes, it's a nice and tight, twisty, and then he's gone in and it's caused the pile-up. But at the same time, yes, even I was sort of thinking, what else could you do to sort of avoid a pile-up, and that it's a real tight, little twisty, little probably not needed section of racetrack. But at the same time, we've seen pile-ups in street tracks all the time. And I was thinking about it. You had Macau, famously, like a couple of years ago, in the GT race, where there was a massive pile-up. But are we going to stop racing at Macau? I don't think so. Okay, Monaco's had its fair share of pile-ups. I remember, I think it was Jules Bianchi or one of the Marussia drives that crashed at Tabac and caused the pile-up, like no one could get through.
Yeah.
So, but that's a street track, so it's in nature. So those things can happen at street tracks. So I don't think you can really blame Formula E too much for a pile-up happening on a street track, because you get that on a street track. So it's just part and parcel of the game. I just think Formula E have had, after not having many red flags, they've had way too many red flags in their races recently.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and we've gone through 5 seasons and we've hardly seen a red flag. Okay, but in 4 seasons, but now in season 5 we seem to be having a red flag every other race, on average. And so we need to stop that. But it's not anything. It's just the risks of what could happen. You know, like the one we had with Sims is like just the car was in the middle of the track. It was hard to recover. Like the only thing you could possibly do was either have a really slow safety car and get marshals and trucks on and have it as a safety car, or stop the race and just wait and clear it. Don't lose any time. I think maybe Formula E are using the time as precious, so they're not wasting. They, instead of throwing a safety car and wasting 10 minutes behind a safety car, because the race is only 45 minutes long. So if we waste 10 minutes behind a safety car, going really slowly, okay, everyone's energy is fine, and we've recovered the car. We've lost 10 minutes of racing. Everyone's energy is that perfect. They can race flat out, which means we get no overtaking and no point of anything else. So maybe they're just throwing the red flag in a sense to make sure those races don't come into like a procession in a sense. What do you think, boys?
I agree. And in terms of the circuit layout as well, on a different side of things, I know this weekend overtaking was quite a big topic, but you think of circuits like Mexico, which isn't a street circuit, it's a purpose-built circuit. Look how difficult that was for drivers to overtake. It was almost impossible around that circuit, so it's a difficult one they're in. But in terms of red flags, you're right, we have seen a fair few this season, haven't we? And I think that is partially to blame the circuits, but they can't help that. But I think as well, the Gen 2 cars are big dogs. They are big things. So, and we've seen how easy it is with the slight, tiniest bit of damage, how uncontrollable these cars are. I mean, Sam Bird a couple of weekends ago was saying that already these cars are so good to drive because they're so unpredictable, and it's really down to the drivers and how they do work the car. So, I mean, Lopez's incident that did cause the pile up. It was an obscure one, wasn't it? It's not like at any other point in the weekend we saw anything like that, and it was because it was lap 1. You know, if there hadn't have been 3 cars right behind him and a couple on the outside, that sort of incident I don't think would have happened. So I think they're fine with what they're doing. For me, I don't go into Paris next time out and think, I'm not looking forward to this because it's a street circuit, because I think for me that's part of the reason I like Formula E, because in Formula 1 there are so many run-off areas and there isn't that element that if they make a mistake they're going to be in the wall. So I think I see it a little bit differently to certain fans.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that talking point. I think it's a difficult question to answer, because in my opinion FE's circuits are a bit too narrow in certain parts.
Yeah, I agree.
Or put differently, FE could have put escape roads, or maybe not escape roads, but these little run-off areas around some parts of the circuit, and instead they put a wall there, which was the case at which was the case in the location. Lopez obviously had this incident, which led to the red flag. I think it's a parking space in Rome there, and there's no real need to put a wall there. If I'm not completely mistaken, maybe I'm just mixing up my geography of Rome right now. but if there's space for runoff areas, Formula E tends to not use it and instead put a wall there. And that might be the best idea to fix the problem with circuit design.
Just to keep it current, so we don't repeat ourselves in like 20 minutes time, let's just look at the Evans and Lotterer pass, where for the race lead, where Evans overtook Lotterer at that chicane where Sam and Lopez came together. Now, if there was no wall, if there was a runoff area where Lotterer, because obviously Mitch had gone down and committed down the inside, and Lotterer, I don't know how Lotterer kept it out on the wall. He must have slammed on those brakes. I don't even know how he didn't lock up. Like, he managed to get it stopped just in time before he hit that wall. Now, there is space, as Tobias was saying, to have, we saw it because that's where they pulled off and there was a little escape road, which, you could have as part of the escape road anyway, as a runoff, where Sims went off in qualifying, I think it was. So there was space. So instead of having Lotterer nearly hitting a wall and stopping, if he just cut through the chicane and had to give the place up, at least he's still in the race. He's not. He could have hit the wall. It could have been another DNF for Lotterer through no fault of his own. Okay, but at least if there was a runoff where we can have a runoff section, then that's fine. Obviously, not every corner we can have a runoff section. It's a street circuit. But if there's a design and you can have a small runoff area like they do in Monaco in the swimming pool chicanes, if you can have a small little runoff where drivers can just cut it and stay in the race and just give up the position and fall in behind, then I think we'd be happy with that. Because it's unfair, and I think it would also promote overtaking. I don't know what you think. I think it would also promote, because if you can cut the chicane, not to keep the position, because obviously if you cut the chicane and keep the position and you've gained that unfair advantage, you need to give it back. But drivers, I suppose, imagine if Lotterer hit the wall, Evans wouldn't have won that race, because Evans would have caused the collision. Yeah, and therefore would have been penalised and wouldn't have won the race. Okay, but if Evans did that move and there was a runoff area and Lotterer took to the runoff area and Evans went through, then there would be no penalty and, the race result would have stood as it did. So, obviously, in that situation, Lotterer had to hit the wall and not finish. But, it was millimetres from something like that happening. It was millimetres from him breaking his front wing and having to pit to replace it and then losing all those positions. It was those fine margins.
Yeah, and runoff areas also reduce the risk of red flags, don't they? Had it been for a bit of a runoff area, remember Berlin Alexanderplatz a couple of years ago? There was a chicane. I think it even was turns 2 and 3.
The Bill the Bollard.
This little chicane with Bob the Bollard. Yeah,
Bob, not Bill.
And Bob the Bollard. I actually opened a Facebook page.
Yes, I remember.
And a Twitter page. Those were the days, Jack. Yes. Oh, God. Back in the day. Anyway.
I think I still follow
it. I still have the accounts to the Twitter account, actually. But there tends not to be Bob doesn't tend to be around anymore in FE. But if we had escape routes, it obviously reduces the risk of red flags as well. And that's good for the show, that's good for TV broadcasters. I mean, in Rome, we had around 50 minutes, I think, of red flag, where there were just no cars on track. And in Germany, where I come from, that's been a major issue for the broadcaster, because we had like the German equivalent of the BBC broadcast, like BBC One, actually.
Is it RHL?
Imagine BBC One did Formula E. That's what happened in Germany over the last weekend. But they had to move on to the next program at 5. So they had the start, the first 1.5 laps, and then 50 minutes of red flag, and then moved on to the next program. And runoff areas people complain in F1 about runoff areas, but in Formula E, I think it's a different story, because that prevents long red flag stoppages. Yeah. Anyway, I think we talked about it all in terms of circuit design. it's an idea for the future of Formula E. Maybe talk about circuit design for the next couple of years, but for the time being, I mean, hindsight is a great thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the main, I was going to say main overtaking spots, that chicane, but if you would have looked at the track over the weekend, I don't think that would have been one of the ones you'd have said, oh yeah, there's going to be overtaking there. So I think it's
That's true, yeah.
Let's move on. So at the end of lap 1, that's how far we've got so far to the end of lap 1, we obviously had the red flag, and somehow, through all the chaos, only Gary Paffett was the only guy who ended up not continuing. Someone who managed to wrestle their car back to the pits was Sam Bird. That was a mighty effort. And then as you two just mentioned, we had a hell of a long red flag, which isn't ideal, but like we say, that's what we got. And to be honest, the race control was as fair as they could be, letting some of the guys further down the field who hadn't done that extra lap, they went out first, and then we saw the leaders go out afterwards. So I quite like that they used their time wisely, I want to put, but they definitely had plenty of time. The race resumed. The focus was fully on that front fight between Andre Lotterer, Mitch Evans, and the almost chess game they were playing with the tack mode. Behind them was Stoffel Vandoorne, somehow, in a car which every time he's qualified highly this season has just gone backwards and backwards in the race. He was keeping up with those two quite well, I thought. And then behind Vandoorne was quite a gap to Buemi, and we had this, I suppose, it was quite a massive scrap in the midfield, to be honest with you. We had the likes of D'Ambrosio, Da Costa, De Grassi, Verline, Bird, Frines, all of these guys making overtakes, but we didn't really get to see it. So I don't really know if there's anything in particular you guys wanted to say about that midfield fight, because on paper it actually looked really good.
Yeah, it was really scrappy actually.
Yeah,
you're right. The main battle in the midfield obviously was Frines and Buemi. We've seen these two battle it out in Sanya last time out as well, so that had a bit of a, how do you say it in English, a bit of a taste. I mean, both of them, the two were really going at it. In Sanya and in Roma once again. And, shall we hear what Frines had to say about the battle?
Have you got
because
it
we
ready?
actually have a bit of a quote here. We've got it, yeah.
Go for it.
So let's hear what Robin Frines had to say about his battle against the Nissan.
Yes, I used my attack mode very early in the race as well, just after the red flag, to try to overtake him. Again, story of the season that, if you have attack mode and you're behind the Nissan at similar pace, he still pulls way out of the corners. So it's very hard to overtake him. I didn't get the shot, so I tried. It was a very clean overtaking opportunity I had from him. He gave me space, I gave him space. We didn't touch at all. He was side by side through turn 9, so that was a bit fair from both drivers. So good from him. And eventually, he got attack mode, he pulled away, and then I just tried to hit my targets, get in my rhythm, and slowly get back up his tail, which was the case. And use attack mode, use the energy to be back behind him. I was just waiting for him to use the attack mode, which was the case. So everything worked as planned, as we discussed. So in that case, it was a good day.
One thing I really found interesting about this interview is him talking about the Nissan pulling away. It's been a topic, a hotly debated topic this year. Nissan have done something with their powertrain. The rumour is they have a twin MGU setup, which gives them an advantage going out of corners. It's a bit complex to explain right now in the amount of time we have, but the rumour is Nissan have opted for a twin MGU setup, which gives them an unfair advantage, and it's got to do with energy storage in the second MGU. It's really complex. Another interesting point Robin raises, apart from trying to follow the quick out of the corners Nissan, is attack mode. And we've seen debates about attack mode all all year long, basically. The new strategic element, giving drivers 225 kilowatts instead of 200 in the race. Guys, how do you like it in Rome last time out?
First and foremost, unfair advantage is a bit harsh. Like, I think it's clever, right? Unfair advantage. They've not been banned for it.
But they're planning on banning it.
Well, maybe. Well, they've taken a long time if they want to ban it. So it's been legal for 7 races.
Yeah.
They've only got 6 left. So it's a bit late in the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's been homologated.
Yeah.
So there's.
So what's the problem?
I think calling it unfair isn't really that fair. Yeah, you're right.
I'm only putting your ear, but when you said it, I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Teams say it's unfair.
Well, of course they would, because do you see how it pulls away from a straight? Like, what Nissan have done is the acceleration that it gets out of the corners is unbelievable. And if they've found a loophole in the regulations, and that's what motorsport's about. And you've got to, if it's been homologated and checked by the FIA and so forth, then you've got to give their hats off to them because they've done an amazing job. But
that costs a lot, doesn't it?
It does cost a lot.
That's the big... Yeah, that's a big question. Shall we ban it because of costs? Otherwise, all other teams would opt for it in season 7, maybe. But that just costs.
Well, that's the thing. They all have to run within a cost cap anyway. Like they're very limited on costs and how much they can spend. It's not unlimited amount of money. It's not Formula One. Like there is a limit that they have to spend. Like they can't go over.
The teams are limited. Manufacturers are not. So manufacturers can spend they can spend all sorts of money, but the teams are limited.
I thought they were all limited. I thought
budget.
that was the whole point of the cost cap and keeping costs down, because that was what Formula E preached. I might have been wrong.
Yeah,
so it's just the teams. So it's the teams within.
Right.
It's the teams within. So the powertrain they can do what they want, but the rest they can't do.
So the teams have an operational cost budget. I'm not sure how much it is. Actually.
No, it's never been really.
But the teams
set.
have a specific amount of money they can spend over a year. However, manufacturers don't. And Renault spend north of 10 million quid each year.
Yes, I heard that, but I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it?
Audi does as well, and manufacturers just don't have a cost cap.
It's just so easy to avoid, isn't it?
Yeah, this twin MGU setup just costs a lot in development, and that's the worry many teams have. Because
why don't they just put a cost cap on manufacturers then? So you can't spend more than 5 million.
To do, isn't it?
Well,
I mean,
good question.
Look at HWA and Mercedes now, because Mercedes aren't an actual team, but it's a separate leg of the same company in essence, isn't it? So it's like Formula One. I always find the Haas model an easy one to put it towards. If they put a cost cap in Formula One, Haas buy their cars or their chassis from Dallara, but Dallara wouldn't have a cost cap, so they can just pump all this money in. And then Haas just use a one-off purchase to buy the chassis. So I think it's that kind of idea that they can't regulate every single company with the cost cap.
Another debate, right? But
yeah, a fun one.
But yeah, well, the thing is, like, Formula E have always been, they've always practiced what they preach. They've always wanted to keep costs down. That's why cars were identical in the first season. That's why in the second season they could only change, like, the inverters and hardly, like, and the stuff on the rear suspension. Like, you couldn't really do much. And there's all been this focus on software. It's homologated at the beginning of the season, so you can't do anything during the season. I think that's probably where the cost cap comes into effect. So it stops them from spending money during the season to fix problems that they may have done, because it's too late to be homologated. But I felt like, well, maybe there should be some sort of cost cap for the manufacturers. And I didn't realise. I thought it was the whole team. So I thought that included the manufacturers. So I obviously read that bit of the regulation a bit wrong. But thank you for clarifying, because I thought there was a cost cap for the whole thing. But if Nissan have spent the money, then fine, they spent the money. But you know what's really interesting then? If there is unlimited amount of spending that manufacturers can do at the moment, how incredibly tight is this championship? I thought it was incredibly tight because of the cost cap thing, and they couldn't spend that much money. That's what was keeping it so tight. But when you put it that way, then to think about it, how tight this championship is, considering that Audi, Nissan, Jaguar, they can spend as much as they like, it's pretty impressive.
It actually is, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
But
at the same time, we see teams with less of a budget, or manufacturers with less of a budget. NIO, Penske, Venturi, all of these guys, especially Venturi's customer team HWA, at the back end of the team standings.
But that's what
and
happens, though,
manufacturer
sadly.
standings.
That's motorsport, and that's been motorsport, the ones who spend the most money, the ones who have the budget, or the ones who can, use it the best. Like, you kind of expect that. Like, with the amount of manufacturers we've got, like, if you can't play ball with Audi and you're a manufacturer, then you're not gonna win races, and I think that's what Neo's fallen victim to. I think Neo spent a lot of money operationally. Like, they used to have you can't, maybe you weren't there, because in Donington and maybe in Valencia, I think you maybe have been to, they had these beautiful massive trucks, like proper motorsport luxury sort of trucks, and I think they spent, I'm not saying they spent money in the wrong places, but maybe it looks like they spent money in the wrong places, like getting all their facilities sort of upgraded, but then not actually spending the money needed properly on the powertrain. But anyway, to go to your question about attack mode, because that's where we started. So what did we think of attack mode? Attack mode in Rome, I wasn't the biggest fan of. I don't think there was much of a penalty. I think drivers were losing between half, 3/4 to a second to a full second, probably taking attack mode, which, arguably, probably isn't enough. There's been a lot of debate about attack mode over the weekend. Drivers are wanting more power, saying that 225 kilowatts isn't enough to get an overtaking move, and drivers are using it to just get it over with, to using it as a waste, or using it to defend, or trying to use it at a time where they don't really need to use it. They're just using it because they can, and they're not going to lose anything from it. Which was actually really interesting talking to drivers about, because that wasn't that wasn't really the purpose of attack mode, and to finally be able to speak to their drivers and get their actual opinions on it was actually really interesting. But I want to credit Robin Frines. Obviously, he did pass Buemi using attack mode, and Buemi was in attack mode, so Frines had gone into attack mode first, and then the lap before, Buemi then went into it the lap after, but Frines was, so both of them then had attack mode, so then it's basically anyone's race, just at a higher power usage. But Frines was able to get the move done to finish fourth, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm at the beginning of the season, I loved attack mode. The past couple of races, it's been there, but I don't really think it's had much of an effect on the racing overall. So I'd like to see them. I know over the weekend, a lot of the drivers were mentioning they wanted to see more power added to attack mode, so I think that could spice it up a little bit, but I think overall it's been better implemented than fan boost was. Sorry, I've got to mention that every time, but that is still a thing, and that's almost, might as well not be a thing anymore, fan boost, but it's fine, attack mode. Anyone want to add anything else to attack mode, or should we get to the end of the race a little bit, or what do you fancy?
I've got something.
I'm not really sure if attack mode was supposed to be a disadvantage. It was supposed to be a strategic element.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Sanya, it obviously was a disadvantage. This time out in Rome, I think it was an advantage to have attack mode. And that still makes it a strategic element, doesn't it? So you lose around half a second to 1 second by activating it. But we've seen drivers come really close to... by the end of the lap, they were back at their earlier position, and the 225 kilowatts really helped in Rome. Long straights, some big acceleration parts, that's where the extra power does help. And extra power and coming closer to your rival still is a strategic element, in my opinion. So
yeah, true.
I don't think it was supposed to be a disadvantage, just a strategic element, and I think attack mode once again delivered in terms of being a strategic element.
I suppose I don't think personally I don't think they lost enough time in attack mode. I don't think I think they should have lost more time. I suppose you're right, but by using the straights, they were basically right back up if the person in front hadn't used attack mode, but then they were struggling to get past, which is why this call for more power. But then maybe having a bigger penalty, so you're losing 2 seconds or 3 seconds to activate it. But then you're 40 kilowatts more. You're in full qualifying power mode. But then, as some drivers were saying, if you go into full qualifying power mode, obviously the faster you go, the more energy you use. So that means the more energy saving you have to do. But that's what some drivers were saying. But that's great, because that means there's more, yes, you have to use the attack mode, but then you've got to use it. And I don't know if the drivers must be able to. If they go to 250 kilowatts, say I only have to overtake one driver, like Franz did, you could only overtake Buemi. Like, I'm unsure, I'm pretty sure they could probably do this. But if I overtake Buemi using 250 kilowatts, I don't need to carry on using 250 kilowatts for the whole. Maybe I could turn it down. Or, like, turn it down to a lower setting. Maybe you could have attack mode, but you can maybe use a different power mapping, so you're allowed to use 250, but if you use 250, then your energy is going to plummet, and you've got to then, once you've got the move done, you've got to then save more energy, because it's like that, reward and cost and reward thing going back and forth. So if you get the reward by using attack mode, but then you're costing yourself, because then you're going to have to save more energy because you've used more energy, then that could be really interesting, because someone might make a mistake and use too much energy trying to get past someone, and then have to really save, and then they've not managed attack mode properly. And that, to me, could make it really more strategic. Okay, because if you can use, if you can maybe use between 225 to 250, but it's your prerogative for that amount of time what power map you want to use within that. So if you use more, then you have to save more. I think that's brilliant. I think that's maybe what they could do. I don't know. That literally just came to my head as I was speaking. So what do you think?
I agree with you, Jack.
Yeah.
Let's go on twice if you want.
I agree as well. I mean, we've seen power being raised in FE from season to season, and I'm sure at some stage we'll have 300 kilowatts of qualifying power. One day, maybe with a Gen 4 or Gen 5 car, we'll have the exact same power output as F1 has. 300. How much power does an F1 car have in terms of kilowatts? Let's see.
The electric motor unit that produces 160 brake horsepower, the kinetic one.
No, the entire power unit.
Oh, the entire power unit with the whole thing. It's about 800.
Let's say they have 950 horsepower, which would be around 700 kilowatts. So we might see 700 kilowatts in 10 years. That's a long way off now. Let's talk about the next 2 years. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's the point I'm aiming at getting to. We will see more power in qualifying, maybe as soon as next year or the year after, and that gives the possibility to adapt attack mode as well. And I agree that's a good idea for the show and for the drivers, with more energy having to be saved, but at the same time being able to use more energy. That's a good idea for the future of attack mode.
For Marie, we're just here. We're just saying, we're here. We have great ideas. Yeah, all you need is just a little check, and we can help you out. So, but the only one thing I want to say before we go is just we've had the same. Please spice it up as well. Like 2 attack modes for 4 minutes every single race. Like, what's the point in announcing it half an hour before or 45 minutes before the race starts if it's the same every race? They have to arm it. They have to arm it twice. So this was another thing that I thought of. So instead of arming it twice, well, you have to arm it twice, but you can maybe have 3 activations. Maybe you can use it 3 times, but you don't have to use it 3 times. You have to use it twice, but there's a 3rd time that you can use it, but the minutes are short. So instead of using it for 4 minutes, you've got 2-minute intervals of using attack mode. But you have one whether you can choose if you want to use an extra one or not. So just spice it up, because it's the same. It's not supposed to be the same every race weekend. That was part of the pitch about attack mode. It was going to be different at every race weekend, but it hasn't. Yeah,
but I mean, they have the option to use it 5 times during
I think
the race.
they have to arm it
maybe
5 times. I think what that is you're allowed to arm
That's
it.
true, yeah.
You have to arm it, say, so that the people know, the race control know you're going to use attack mode. But if you arm it and then opt not to do it, so you can only choose to do it 5 times, and in those 5 times, twice you actually have to do it.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not really sure if they should have the option of having 3 attack modes and only using 2. How about maybe just using 3 attack modes in a race?
Maybe.
How about that?
But then shorten the time limit, like...
Then shorter, yeah, that's right. So
I
we've
don't know, it's just something
seen 2
different.
activations for 4 minutes each. How about 3 activations for 2 minutes of attack mode?
Yeah, and then you can switch
Which
between
is
each race.
1.5 laps.
So if you feel like, attack mode might be really beneficial, so you don't want to have them for a long time, but give them an extra attack mode just in case. Like, so 3 for 2. And if you feel like overtaking could be hard and they need, in that track, and they might need attack mode for longer in that race, then you go for 2 to 4. Like, just some sort of variation.
It's worth a try, isn't it? I mean, while they've got the option, you might as well do it.
While we're still alive and breathing, Formula E, we're still here. Like, just ask, and ask and we'll provide.
No. Should we get back to the race?
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really much more to talk about in terms of the race. So we spoke about it a little bit earlier. The clinical moment, the moment that this race will be remembered for, the Mitch Evans move on Andre Lotterer, a smart move from Evans. Lucky that it paid off. I think, Jack, you were mentioning that a little bit earlier. That very easily could have been tears for Andre Lotterer, but
And Evans.
I think it was both of them, yeah. But I think that was almost a visual representation of how Lotterer has evolved from even last year in Rome, where he was really hot-headed last season, I felt, always keen for a crash, it seemed. But I know, Jack, you spoke about this in your interview after the race with Andre Lotterer, but he really is becoming a calmer driver, but a really consistent driver. And yes, I mean, we might as well say the result now. Evans won, and yes, he's come away with a second place, but somehow he's up there in the championship now. And we're starting to see some of these drivers that, I mean, look at D'Ambrosio, who now leads the championship. He's not been on the podium since Marrakesh. He's been nowhere. He's been always 19th on the grid, 17th on the grid, and yet he picks up these 7th places in a race. I mean, this time out he managed to get 8th. And yet it's that consistency which is really helping some of those drivers. So, I mean, it was a great race for Jaguar. And there's no denying that they really did have the pace this weekend, albeit I don't really know where that's come from. I was obviously very happy. I quite like Mitch Evans. But for you two, how did you see this race for Jaguar? Is it going to be a season where they can win again? I'm not really too sure.
I'm not really sure about it either, but I have to say, and I tweeted about that a couple of days ago, I don't think there's a way of not being happy for Mitch Evans and Jaguar. They've been working so hard for the last couple of years. They've had so many disappointments over the last few years, and winning in Formula E, the first win obviously always is the most difficult one. And winning in Formula E takes so much hard work, it takes brains, raw speed, talent, takes tenacity. That's maybe the big word I'm looking for. And Mitch really has shown that he is tenacious and that he knows how to. He's really worked hard for this one, and we really have to give it to him. I mean, thoroughly deserved. No matter which team you support, you have to be happy for Jaguar, and especially for Mitch Evans. His first win since the 2016 GP2 race in Austria, and that's been a long drought for him, and that even more is a reason to be happy for him. Speaking about Jaguar's chances about a possible win, not really sure. Mitch has been a frequent point scorer, obviously, and he scored decent points. 12 points, which is 4th place in Ediria, Saudi Arabia, the season opener. He's always been in the top 10 this year, but he seemed to be one of the front runners in the midfield. And this might have just been luck, and for the first time, all things coming together for Jaguar. I'm not really sure. In FE this year, anyone could win. That's what I always say. And Jaguar certainly has the pace, and they can show they can perform good. So far, the luck has been the only missing thing, but I'm not sure if... Let's put it that way. Jaguar still has the performance to win in the next races, but I'm sure the competition will bounce back, and that might be the hindering factor for Jaguar.
But the thing I find this interesting. So I was just looking at the drivers' standings, and I'm just looking. So Jerome D'Ambrosio, who's leading the championship with 65 points, he's been in Group 1 for the whole season. So for the qualifying system, but his race results have really been affected. So in the last 3 races, he's only scored 12 points, but he's still championship leader. But then you're looking, Antonio Felix da Costa's also, he's been in there for Group 1 for 5, but 64. So round 5, he only scored 1 point. He scored 2 points in Rome, where we just came from, and he got 3rd place in Sanya. But what's interesting to me is now the Group 2 runners who have been in frequently for Group 2, because obviously Group 1 we've had the likes of Sam Bird, Da Costa, the Buemi, they're starting to fall down the order now going into these Group 2s, and the people that were in Group 2 and Group 3 are beginning to become higher up in the championship, because now you've got
Group 3 is looking crazy.
You've got Andre Lotterer, who's been in Group 2 and Group 3, who's now 3rd in the championship. Mitch Evans, who's been in Group 3 and Group 2, who's now 4th in the championship. Lucas Di Grassi, who hasn't always been in Group 1, he's been mainly Group 2, is now 5th. Robin Friends is 6th. So you've had Sam Bird, who was our championship leader for ages, is down in 8th place. You've got reigning champion John-Eric Verne down in 7th. Yes, you could say there are 11 points separating Sam Bird from Jerome D'Ambrosio, at the top of the standings. But that's where, in my opinion, in terms of the qualifying system, where it's slightly flawed, is that those that were at the top of the championship for so long are now flowing down the table. Now, this is what Sam was saying. Now he's in Group 2. This is his chance to then go back to try and reclaim some ground in the championship and start qualifying high. Because look at Sam's results since round 4. He was top of the championship at this stage, round 4, and he scored 2 points. Then in round 5 he got 9, nothing in round 6, and nothing in round 7. But Sam Bird, looked like a proper championship protagonist, but is falling along the wayside just because of these bad qualifying performances, by being in Group 1. So it's really interesting.
Lopez punting off.
Yeah, but obviously what happens is if you have a bad qualifying result, especially in street circuits, you are far more likely to be in a midfield collision. It's just fact. Right. You put yourself at risk, and that's what I don't like about this qualifying system, is that those championship protagonists who were there early on are now being penalised in a sense, and finding themselves in a position where they're losing out in the championship race because they're having to fight through the midfield, and fighting through the midfield, as we've seen in Formula E, ain't easy. These drivers are fantastic drivers. They're not going to let you go past easily, considering how close these cars are, and are now losing out in the championship and now have to regain and see if they can now regain. And I don't think a championship should be artificially doing this to create a really close championship. I feel like it's a bit wrong. But but when looking at the table, obviously it's incredibly tight, but I think the way we're getting there is a bit wrong.
I agree with you, and the stat we all know now: 7 races, 7 different drivers, 7 different teams. You look at, like you say, Jack, Group 2 and Group 3. Looking at Group 3 now, you've got Pascal Wehrlein, Ollie Rowland, Buemi, Vandoorne, and Sims. 4 drivers haven't won. Very easily, we go into Paris, and I think they're going to be, especially Wehrlein, Rowland, and Buemi. I think they're your favourites going into that race. And like you said, because of the qualifying system, it's going to help those guys out so much. They've got quick cars, especially Nissan. I think they're the big outlier that haven't won a race this season. So really the only guy that I'm thinking of that has been able to sort of somehow cheat the system is Andre Lotterer. And I don't really know how he's been able to do that, get so high up in the championship without getting that win. But even he's going to be sort of stuck now as well, isn't he? So are you two feeling the same, that it's next time is going to be sort of Nissan, Wehrlein, those sort of guys that are going to be in for the hunt?
Well, you never know what will happen.
No.
It might rain in Paris, and then we have the tables turned once again.
Yeah.
In theory, yes, groups 3 and 4, I don't even think that the disadvantage of being in... so the difference between groups 3 and 4, I don't think it's that big in comparison to the difference between groups 1 and 2. So group 1 obviously has the worst conditions, in theory, of all. But afterwards, they've cleaned the circuit, and then it's smooth sailing for groups 2 to 4. And... of course, there's difference between qualifying 2 and qualifying 4, but the difference isn't as big as it is in comparison to groups 1 and 2. So, in theory, yes, Group 1 has the worst conditions, but afterwards, in my opinion, anyone coming out of groups 2 to 4 could be in the Superpole shootout for Paris. Yeah, we'll see.
I agree.
Paris has a lot of trees standing around the circuit. There'll be lots of debris on the track, leaves falling, dust settling between FP2 and qualifying. It'll be important to be in Superpole, obviously, and it'll be important to be in one of those last 3 groups in Paris, more than it has been in the last 3 races. But I'm not sure if it's that much of an advantage of being in Group 3 compared to being in Group 2.
It's interesting, because obviously some people in Group 1 have gone into Superpole, and that's the argument. Well, sometimes it happens, but it shouldn't just be sometimes, should it? If these are your best drivers, and these drivers are fighting to show that they're the best, but if you're hampering them and stopping them from being the best drivers out there and stopping the manufacturers who are spending the millions that we're talking about, but if they can't qualify at the front of the grid because when they go out on the track, it's not as good as when someone else goes out on the track, then it's just, I don't know. For me, it's just a little bit. It's a little bit artificial. It's a little bit just...
But it's good for the show!
That's what you hear. And even the drivers, this is what was annoying me. And I suppose, they were speaking through gritted teeth in the interviews. They were like, yeah, I don't like it, but it's good for the show. Like, everyone seems to love it. Yay, it's good because everyone loves it. But I don't love it. Because, I don't know, I'm a motor racing fan and I'm used to normal qualifying systems, showing me who's the fastest driver on that day. I don't think Formula E does that. Like, I agree that the group system is probably the best way to go, because obviously you can't have 20 cars out on track in like a group session, like in a knockout Formula 1 session, because the amount of blocking that will go on will be, especially in tracks that are like less than a minute, like Mexico. But at the same time, you can't just keep penalising the people at the top of the championship. And, maybe luck could be turned. You could say, like, what happened in Rome with the rain could happen to the people at the back end of qualifying. So maybe Group 1 will be lucky it's dry, but Group 2 to 4 it's raining. So that means Group 1 will be in Superpole, and then they get happy days. But it's rare that happens in Formula E. We know that with rain. It's very rare that we see it. We've seemed to see it in between sessions lately, actually, but when it comes to race time, or when it comes to it's dry. So, but it seems to just, it rains on purpose in between sessions, but it doesn't actually rain during the session. But anyway.
But you can't bet on that. Yeah, anyway.
Yes, we've been going quite a while, so I think we'll kind of wrap it up here, but obviously, before we go anywhere, we've got one very important question to ask, and that's driver of the day, my favourite bit of the podcast. This week, we will start with Tobias, because I wasn't very nice to you at the beginning, mate, so you can get to go first this time.
My driver of the day has to be none other than Mitch Evans. He's seriously outperformed his car in Rome last time out. He's worked so hard for it, and he's been fighting against Andre Lotterer in the overpowered DS. These cars are incredible. DS Techeetah is incredible this year, and we didn't expect to see that kind of performance when we started the season in Valencia. Or maybe not start the season, but pre-season testing in Valencia. We didn't expect DS to be that quick. And Mitch stood up to Andre. He fought against him, decisive move was the race deciding move by him this time out. And Mitch Evans has to be my driver of the day. Absolutely outstanding drive from the Kiwi driver. And he's my driver of the day. No question.
Yeah, that's not a bad one. I'll give you that. Jack, I'll let you go next. I'll be third this week.
Alright then, so I'm going to go for Stoffel Vandoorne because I think, wow, what a drive from the HWA again. Obviously, what Jaguar did was fantastic, but what HWA have done has been even more incredibly fantastic. The development that car seems to be taking, it seems to be moving in the right direction, which Mercedes will be very happy with as it comes to Season 6. So the car seems to move, and Vandoorne is showing, I think, and I think it has shown the Formula E paddock ever since he's got in that he is a top-class driver. Because I think he's dragged that HWA in races to places where it shouldn't have been. Maybe even in Rome he might have been dragging it a little bit, but I think it's definitely been moving forward. And, even lo and behold, the car, he must have dragged it so hard during that race, you could say, that it broke down after the line. he got the most out of it. But, it doesn't matter if it breaks down. Once you cross the checkered flag, the result stands. So, and he had a drive shaft failure for those who were interested and who didn't know. But he managed to get it back to the pins in some sort of limp home mode, if I can get it out. But yeah, fantastic drive from Vandoorne. Really, and he pulled away from the likes of Sebastian Buemi in that quick Nissan that we were talking about. Had a comfortable gap. So, a solid third place.
I'm a bit stuck. Those two are the favourites, and Vandoorne, we haven't really spoke a lot about today, but yeah, he had a really impressive race. But with the drivers I've got left, again, we didn't see much in terms of on the TV from some of those guys in the midfield, but once again, for me, Jerome D'Ambrosio, coming into this season, I don't think anyone would have expected him to be anywhere near the championship, but once again, starting P19, getting all the way up to 8th place, did a brilliant switchback move on both Da Costa and Verne, I think it was, in one go. He was really racy in that midfield, and for me, I've not really shown him a lot of love this season, but once again today, proving that consistency, and yeah, really showing that he could really be in serious contention for this championship. But that is your lot for the 6th episode of the Formula E Zone podcast. Blimey, you've been here for quite some time. So thank you, as always, for listening. And again, I think we gave quite a unique perspective on Rome, considering we were all there. It was a brilliant weekend. My first ever Formula E weekend actually being at the circuit. So I just want to say once again, thank you to Jack and to the Formula E Zone guys to getting me to the circuit. As always, in the description, you can find links to Patreon, links to Twitter, links to the website for all the latest and greatest Formula E news. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for the Paris E Prix.